Welcome to the Autism Central podcast, the home of real stories, honest conversations, and shared wisdom from England's National Autism Peer Education Programme. Here, we bring together autistic people and the people who love, support, and care for autistic people of all ages and backgrounds to explore every aspect of life. The National Autism Peer Education Programme is delivered by Anna Freud and commissioned by NHS England. Through education, coaching, and connection, we offer resources, group webinars, one-to-one peer support, and community events that centre lived experience and build real understanding. Our vision is a society where autistic people, their families, and those who support them are empowered, connected, and thriving. This is your space, your community, your podcast. Welcome to Autism Central. Hello, I'm Catherine Asta, and I'm really grateful to be joined by my guest today, Sue Lansbury, who was born in 1955 and who received her autism diagnosis very much later in life, just 2 years ago, at the age of 68. Sue describes early life as being shaped by confusion, by overwhelm, shutdown, oversensitivity, anxiety, anger, and aloneness. Experiences that have followed her through school, through a fine art degree, and into adulthood. Like many autistic people, she learned to cope by disappearing and operating under the radar because everything just seemed so hard. Art has been a constant throughout her life, a place for exploration, for self-expression, and for communication when words weren't enough. And after gaining a postgraduate certificate in education, she taught art in mainstream education before moving into work with children and young adults who were themselves struggling. In the mid-1980s, working in a psychiatric hospital, she first encountered autism long before she would ever recognise it in herself. In the early 1990s, she became head of a brand new residential school for autistic children, a role she held for 14 years, until burnout finally defeated years of pushing through. After taking early retirement, she returned to her artwork, making, exhibiting, and running creative retreats, with creativity continuing to be her anchor. She is also the mother of 2 autistic children, both extraordinary individuals. Her daughter was diagnosed recently at the age of 36, and her son, a gifted artist, was undiagnosed but self-identifying as autistic at the time of his death at 28, 5 years ago. Alongside art, the natural and more than human world has offered solace, relationship, and a deep feeling of acceptance when the human world has felt overwhelming. And now, as one of a very small minority of women her age who knows she is autistic, she continues to look forward, hoping that this knowledge can contribute to greater recognition, understanding, and support for autistic women negotiating the many hazards of later life. Thank you so much for being here today, Sue, and for coming on the podcast to share your story with such honesty and courage. I really want to start by going back to that moment of discovery, because discovering that you're autistic at 68 is a pretty huge moment, isn't it? What has helped you to begin to reinterpret your life with compassion, and how has this new understanding really begun to bring you a sense of peace or of clarity about your life, Sue?
That's a big question to answer from a 70-year-old kind of standpoint, because there's an awful lot to untangle. Initially, huge relief. It was just so good to know that my instincts that there was something different about me were not wrong. There was then, after the initial relief, just a huge realization of how much I had to try and untangle from all of those years. Because truly, I didn't know quite who I was. And to try and find out who I was meant I had to go right back to early childhood and go through all of those things that had happened to me as a daughter, as a pupil, as a friend, as how I interacted with other people. It didn't come as a flash. It didn't come as a sudden realization. There was a very slow uncovering of myself, and I'm still doing it. It'll carry on being the case for the rest of my life. I can still feel myself with moments of realization about things that happened early on that give me an insight as to who I might have been. I started masking very, very early on, I think, I realise now. And so the person I needed to connect with was very little me, very, very young me, before all of those other influences overwhelmed me. I had also to sort of work through years and years of therapy, which really hadn't helped very much because the blame had always landed either on me because I hadn't reacted right, or on my family situation, which, they loved me, they were doing their best. I didn't really want to move forward in that negative sort of way. I really wanted to think about who was I, and so I started to go back to re-experience those things that had really sustained me as a very young person. And those things had been making and drawing, and they had also been the natural world, because I truly think I developed a relationship with the natural world, and I use that word very deliberately because I think it was it would. I found acceptance in the natural world. I found safety. I found beauty, and I found solace. And I think that a lot of that got kind of squashed out. I somehow managed to hang on to the artwork throughout my development, but not in a way that was necessarily hugely helpful to me. Again, it's very easy to be influenced by what other people think you ought to be doing. And so, but those threads I've managed to carry forward with me, and to feel so much more confident that they are true me, and not something that I learnt in order to please other people. So the other thing that has been really apparent to me, I don't particularly feel sadness or anger or disappointment that I wasn't recognised earlier, because I know, had I been recognised earlier, the sort of cultural mix, even through my working life, much later on, was very, very different and very specific. But had I been picked up as a very odd child, when in the 50s or 60s or 70s, I think the outlook for me would have been really bleak. And I was fortunate enough to be able to. It was a fortunate thing to be able to mask well enough to get away with it, but it was at a huge personal cost.
That's often the thing that people don't see, is the masking comes at such a huge cost. And I'm sure you're gonna touch on that as you talk.
Yeah, yes, it'll come back in other aspects of our discussion, I'm sure. But when I got my diagnosis, the psychologist that did the testing for me said, "Oh my goodness, you've been so resourceful." And I felt at the time, oh, what a nice thing to say. And then afterwards I thought, yeah, but I don't think even the resourcefulness was at such a cost, such a cost. And yes, I probably had been very resourceful, but I'd lost myself in the process and burnt myself out in the process as well. So it's one of the questions that's always floored me is, what do you want, or what do you like? I've often haven't known the answer to those questions. And again, I've gone along with what those around me want to do or think I ought to do. And all of that needed to be shed and worked through and thought about. So it was it was relief, but that was just the start of it. And the other thing that I really realised at the age of 68 was that because I'd ignored those signs of burnout, because I had been so resourceful and carried on working through rather than allowing myself to stop and recover, was that I had got myself in a really chronic state of burnout. And I kind of explained that away. Oh, well, you're getting on a bit, you're getting on. And of course, you're tired. And of course, you're this. And of course, you're that. And of course, I'd found all sorts of reasons earlier on in life when that might have been the case as well. So I think it's crucial, for me now to know the difference in myself is what is a natural growing older process and what is me as an autistic woman growing older. Um, and so those two things have, have are quite distinct, I think. Yes, you do slow down, or maybe you change interests, or you have other medical issues that might impinge on your well-being. But I think it's really important to hold on to that the autism bit as well. Otherwise, you can be sucked into yet more different diagnoses, just as I have been in the past. Depression, anxiety, all of those things were the explanation earlier on. Now it shifts into being, oh, well, you're getting on a bit, so what can you expect at your age? But yeah, so there's been many, many facets to this.
You said there, Sue, about ignoring the signs, but you were also talking about not knowing what I like, not knowing what I want. And that can also extend when you're autistic to not knowing what you feel. If we don't know what we feel and we don't know what we want and we don't know what we like and we don't know what the signs are of burnout or of chronic ill health, it's only often until we're absolutely floored by our health, mentally or physically, that we actually realize something's wrong. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? Of not knowing or not feeling or not being aware, and how crucial it is then to know for you as an individual what the signs are. What are the signs that you are burning out? What are the signs that you are becoming unwell, mentally, physically?
When I was younger, I I think I just didn't question it. I was in a job which I was very committed to and didn't want to seem as if I was bailing out or failing or too weak or not up to it. It's been hugely costly, I think, because now I think I have to be really careful. Because there has been a cumulative effect, and I think my threshold for burnout is hugely heightened or diminished, whichever way round it is. It's I think I hit that point of tipping into burnout much much more quickly than I might have done when I was much younger. Not just because of my age, but because I've ignored it so many times in the past.
Yeah. So the pushing on through gets to a point where there is no longer any more pushing through that you can do. And, if you think of 7 decades of life and experience, and as part of your life and those experiences, you have experienced such a devastating and profound grief with the loss of your son. And just really thinking about your autistic identity and understanding yourself. So, how do you think that has changed the way that you perhaps make sense of loss? How has your art maybe helped you express what words can't?
I want to talk about my son, but before I do, I just want to say that grief is a kind of a bit of an occupational hazard of getting older anyway. an awful lot of people you lose on the way. Parents, siblings, family members, friends. I don't want to be depressing about this because, we're not really very good as a culture about talking about death, but it is so inevitable. It is going to happen to us all. I think in the face of all that potential shifting, because the landscape of your life changes profoundly when somebody you love dearly dies. And just referring back to what we were talking about earlier about not quite knowing who you are, you're not kind of on firm ground if you don't know who you are, and then something really devastating like somebody really dear to you dies, then it makes life so much harder. So I think we might show it in different ways, but I think autistic people can find loss and death really hard to cope with because something profoundly and fundamental changes in the whole makeup of their lives. I also think there can be huge grief about the person you might have been, the person, all of those years worth of loss and misunderstanding. So grief kind of comes with the territory of being older, being any age, being autistic. My son was a wonderful human being. He was a very creative and expressive person. And through his artwork, he did talk a lot about. I've got a beautiful sculpture that he made, which he entitled Epigenetics, which is all about that those things which we inherit from our forebears and our ancestors. And he thought deeply about all of this. I can't say that I will ever recover from his death, and neither would I want to, because somehow holding his memory still keeps him with me and still keeps the echo and the resonance of his life going forward. And he did leave huge resonance because he always struggled. He did struggle, and none of us quite understood why. And I'll come back to that later. But well, the one thing I'm so proud of him for doing was actually being himself. He did not compromise. He did not try to fit into a world that wasn't willing to accept him as he was. And he managed to find a group of the most amazing, very individual friends, some of whom turned out to have diagnoses and some of whom just were extraordinary in their own right. But he has left such resonance in their lives and ours. And my heart was broken, completely broken when he died. But I have to hold on to the fact that he lived his life exactly as he chose to, without compromising, and with huge amounts of love, not only receiving love from those around him, but giving love himself. He was a very, very thoughtful and generous and loving friend and son and brother. I find it really hard my artwork certainly has helped. it's given me, sometimes I haven't known what to say in my artwork, but just the process of doing it has been, I think it's been really important for me not to think of my artwork as a product, but as a process. And it's the process of making or painting or drawing that has sustained me, I think. Um, One of the things that I love to do that is very repetitive and very calming to me is to weave. It was not a core part of my art practice, but it's just a lovely thing that I do. And I have this image of myself weaving a a beautiful blanket or cloak or mantle for myself, and each of the threads is somebody who has been very dear to me, so that they continue to be a part of the fabric of my life, even though they might not still be here. And my son Jay is very, very, very strong part of that fabric. The other thing that's really helped me is just tuning myself into the seasons and knowing that the circle of life is very real and that death is inevitable, and that spring does come round again. And okay, Jay may not come back in person, but he absolutely does still resonate through so many people's lives. So it's really the hardest thing. And in a funny kind of way, I don't want it to become easy, because that would mean that I'm losing some of that memory. I'm losing some of that resonance. And there's absolutely no sign of that happening at the moment. But I do carry him forward in with such love, and he still inspires me, because he was fearless in his artwork. I would say to him, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing this, and but I'm not sure whether." And I would, "Just do it, Mum. Just do it." And he continues to inspire me. So no, really tough, really tough. And if you're not on firm ground, if you don't know who on earth you are yourself, then how much harder to deal with the the shifting nature of your world if somebody really key dies. Really hard though. There's no easy way through it. If there's true love there, then even more so, I think.
Mm. And if you don't know yourself, like you say, Sue, and you don't know how you actually process things, you don't have a practice that you do, you don't have the words, then traditional forms of maybe therapeutic support, talking therapy, are not going to be the right form, are they? Um, the cloak that you talked about, and the weaving, and wearing that cloak and being surrounded by the people who have really meant something to you in your life sounds like a really comforting thing to do, to hold that. And the natural world, we often look for really complicated solutions to things, don't we, to healing, to grief. And actually, there is so much, as you're describing, that has brought you strength and solace in the natural world, and that predictability of the seasons, but also that impermanence of life. That nothing is ever promised, is it? Nothing is ever
Yeah.
promised.
One of the things that people, in a very well-meaning way, have said to me quite a lot is, "Oh, but you should never live longer than your child." And I'm thinking, I don't know that's ever written down anywhere. I mean, life and death happens when it happens, and it. I can't really go along. I mean, yes, it's heartbreaking to deal with the death of your child, but I don't know. There's nothing written down to say we neatly fall into that order of things. Yeah. So I don't subscribe to that, much as I would wish more than anything that he was still with us in person, but he is still very much with us in spirit, I think.
And you when you were talking about your son Jay, you were talking about how he struggled throughout his life, just as you struggled, and you didn't know why you struggled. And there may be parents, carers, grandparents who are listening to this episode, Sue, who might be feeling maybe a sense of guilt or even self blame about not recognizing autism in themselves or their children sooner than they did. What would you say to anybody who's listening who might be carrying those feelings of guilt or self blame or regret? What would you say?
Oh, I would send out huge waves of compassion, because I think it's something that is a very natural feeling, because you wish to protect those dear to you um, from harm or misunderstanding more than anything else. However, I do really believe that what I know now, I cannot judge my actions or my choices based on what I know now. The knowledge in autism. I mean, goodness sake, I was part of the profession back in the 80s and 90s, and what we all understood to be autism was just a tiny fraction of the picture. Um, and it's so hard now to think, oh, well, of course it was obvious. Of course it was obvious. But that's only with the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of what we know now. We can only make the right decisions. We can only love our children as best as with all our hearts. We can only encourage them to be absolutely themselves. And it's so hard because often you're doing that um, in the context of a society that still doesn't really understand, even though the diagnosis has opened up, even as though now we're relying more on lived accounts of life as autistic people rather than observed accounts of, of what we and interpretations of what we think autistic people may be experiencing. It's still not welcoming. It's still not, children's needs in schools aren't still fully being met. Adults' needs in work aren't being fully met. And it's hard. It's very hard for us, those of us who understand more deeply now, experience it, families who battle with this every day in communities that don't understand it. It's very hard for us not to feel guilty because we kind of get it, and it's so hard to explain for those who don't get it. So I think it is hard. There is guilt attached to it. Of course there is, but there isn't blame attached to it. That's a different thing. It's not your fault. You're doing the best you can. You are loving your child and you're advocating for your child. You're loving your partner, your friend, your grandma, whoever it might be. And it's right that those of us who can speak out do speak out now, I think, because it can only lead to better understanding. But no, I would say try not to feel guilty. Um, it is not your fault. It's not your fault. It's where we are culturally at the moment. There's huge pressures on everybody to try and conform, to try and do the right thing. So for all the extra information that is out there, there's still a lot of misunderstanding. Is hard to advocate for yourself and for those you care for.
You gave me goosebumps as you were giving that message about you doing the best you can, because I know there will be people listening who are maybe deep in the trenches of this and don't hear that from anybody. They don't have anybody supporting them to hear that they are doing the best that they can. Um, so this idea of waves of compassion really struck me when you said that, Sue, because it's a constant, isn't it? A constant in and out of waves of compassion. And it's often when you understand this about yourself, everything it's like somebody just removes another another layer of life, and you see a perspective that you'd never seen before. And it seems so obvious, doesn't it? But it didn't seem obvious at the time. And I think that's the real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I yes, absolutely. I don't think any of us understood very much 20 years ago. I think we're gradually beginning to. I mean, I'm struggling to understand myself because I still mask. I still do it unconsciously and sometimes consciously now. But well, I'm aware that even my closest friends will, I don't understand why I respond in certain ways at certain times. It's so hard to, and without giving a continuous running commentary about what's happening, which just isn't practical, it's really hard to enable other people to see what's going on inside and to understand the pressures, the continuous, constant pressures that surround you. Yeah.
And those pressures and those challenges and those struggles don't disappear just because you become an adult or just because you become an older adult. And if you were to draw on your lived experience, Sue, and all those years you spent working alongside autistic people, what hidden risks do you think undiagnosed, and not just undiagnosed, but undiscovered, people who haven't discovered yet that they are autistic, never mind diagnosed, especially those older autistic adults, what do you think those risks are that they face? And what support or awareness do you think would have made a difference earlier in your life?
One of the problems as you get older, and it's almost a joke, but it really isn't a joke. A lot of people say, "Oh, I became invisible when I hit menopause, just stopped being noticed somehow." And that's another real hazard in our culture, that people might even feel that. It may not be true of everyone, but it's certainly such a common thing that I hear. If you are an older woman and you feel invisible and you don't know quite who you are anyway, what chance do you have of having your needs met if you don't know what they are, if you don't know how to express them, if society sees you as a bit of an irrelevance anyway because you're an older woman? um, it's I think there's a real hazard in there that those of us who are older and don't know how to express what it is that we feel, or even know that we've got the right to express those things, um, that we will never get our needs met. If I was thinking forward for myself, to a point maybe where I might need care, or those women who haven't even got a diagnosis might need care. I'm wondering to myself, what would autistic burnout look like? What would a meltdown look like in a care setting? What would shutdown look like? Or chronic overwhelm? Or even a skill regression? All of those things that we now understand are part of being autistic and of an autistic life. Um, if you don't know you're autistic, or even if you do know you're autistic and you're then yet again in a situation a bit like you were when you were a child and in school, and other people were making decisions on your behalf, I think there's a real chance that the quality of your life will be hugely diminished. Um, and I don't really know what what the answer is, except to say that I am writing a sort of self-portrait of myself, and it's not finished. I'm going to, a bit like my weaving, I think I'm going to just have it as an open document that I keep on adding bits to, um, in the hope that, just as a failsafe, if I'm not able to express my needs anymore, that there will be a document that explains why I might not be able to sit in a loud day room with daytime television blaring and bright lights and so on. It might just help to explain that I really, really, really need to go and sit outside sometimes. I need to be and feel the wind on my face and hear the birds, not recordings of them, but actual. Those things are all in there, but it's such, I do worry, because if schools who are aware of autism are not able to meet the needs of young people, and workplaces who are aware of autism aren't able to create environments that support their employees, what chance have we got as in an environment where so few people are diagnosed now, that possibly they will, this is nothing against people who work in that sector, because I know they work so hard and with a great deal of love and care often. But if you don't know you're dealing with an autistic older person, how on earth can you create an environment that will support them and allow them to live their lives comfortably and with dignity? So it's a big thing, and I know there's research going on, and I know that it is complicated because the comorbidity of other issues, come into play in later life, which completely throws things. But I really wonder, when I go into a care home as a visitor, how many people there might be who are sitting shut down in their own worlds, are doing it because it's the only way they can cope with that environment.
Mm. This idea of a self portrait to me needs to be in every care setting. We have hospital passports, don't we, which vary from trust to trust and hospital to hospital in the NHS. And these are often, when you're going into a clinical setting, to tell the team who are caring for you what your needs are and how you need to be supported. But what you're talking about here is, this isn't an acute hospital stay. This is somewhere that becomes your home. It becomes the place that you live. It becomes, the people that you're sharing that space with become your closest people day to day in your life. And you have decades and decades of knowledge about yourself and what you need. So this idea of creating your own self-portrait now knowing what your needs are, knowing that you need to be outside, knowing that you need to feel that wind on your face, knowing you need to hear the birds, knowing you need to be able to watch the seasons change. And when you can't advocate for yourself, that document is there to really express what those needs are. And so I think, yeah, I think this needs to be shared as widely as possible, Sue. I really do. And if you look to the future, then what is giving you hope in terms of aging, in terms of future care, the legacy that you want to leave as a woman, as an autistic woman, as a mother, as an artist, as a human being?
I was really keen to not. We've been talking about death, we've been talking about grief, we've been talking about guilt, we've been talking about really difficult stuff. And I thought, oh my goodness, I really, really don't want this to be a depressing conversation, because that's not how I feel. Yes, I feel deep, deep sadness, but I think nobody reaching my age and beyond cannot live a life without sadness in it. Looking forward, I am really lucky. I have my health, I have my faculties, I have my curiosity. I I feel passionately that it's important to keep an open mind and keep questioning and looking forward and looking out. And it's very easy to kind of stop that process of curiosity at certain points in your life, particularly if it's been a tough life. So I'm really happy that we're talking, and not just us, but a lot of people now are talking. And a lot of people, I go on Instagram, I look at podcasts, there are an awful lot of people now talking really eloquently about their experience of being autistic. And so the word is out there now, and I don't think it's going to not be out there, but that's in the face of a culture that really is not that keen to listen, even so. But I really want to play my part in that. I feel I have not a unique, but an unusual perspective in that I am older and diagnosed, and I've also had years watching that, what that means, getting a diagnosis change over time. And I feel those of us who can speak out and try and advocate for others should do, because I truly dream of a time in the future where being an edge dweller, and I think I always have been an edge dweller, is okay. That's just as an important part of the community as any other. I take hope in the fact that there is a lot of research going on. I heard of another lovely branch of science the other day called neuroaesthetics, which somebody was commenting, saying, well, that's kind of what autistic people, how autistic people operate all the time. It's not a rare occurrence. So I think there's going to be lots of crossover and lots of hopefully really helpful exploration of what it might mean to live fully as an autistic person in a really broad, accepting culture. And I know, and I'm saying that in the face of all that I see going on in the world. I know that's a huge challenge, but I think we must not lose sight of that. It's not. And the stronger we are as individuals and the more we're able to tell it as it is, then the better, I think, for not just for us, but society as a whole. Because I think a diverse society is a much stronger society.
And what you have brought to this episode today, Sue, is compassion. So much compassion. and so much wisdom. And I think there is so much wisdom in the older autistic population that we need to hear more of, and we need to share more of, decades and decades of lived experiences and voices that have never been heard in terms of the autistic community. So thank you for coming and sharing your story with us with such honesty and vulnerability. I know how hard it is talking about some of the things that you have and talking about Jay. But your reflections that you've shared on your late discovery, on grief, on creativity, and how you are still coming to know yourself later in life, and that self-portrait project that you were working on. I know that the words that you've shared are going to really resonate deeply with many people who are listening. So thank you for being here. And I also want to say that I certainly, and I know that our listeners notice you. You are noticed. And yeah, thank you, Sue.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for inviting me. Thank you.
If any of the topics mentioned in today's episode are of special interest to you and you'd like to discuss this further, you can book a one-to-one session with a peer guide on our website at autismcentral.org.uk. Autism Central would encourage listeners to do their own research and make informed decisions about any strategies or equipment mentioned in this podcast. Any advice or suggestions given by a guest or peer educator do not replace or substitute advice received from direct consultation with a qualified professional. The Autism Central podcast is produced by Autism Central and is the copyright of NHS England.